It started with a noise no one could explain. A low hum rising somewhere beneath the ground, like the Appalachian hills themselves were breathing. I heard it for the first time on a fog-soaked evening in September, just 3 days after I arrived in Braxton County, the forgotten corner of West Virginia where Kate Fitzgerald had been murdered 50 years earlier. They say small towns have long memories, but this one felt like it had a pulse. Every boarded window, every rusted church bell seemed to whisper her name. Kate Fitzgerald, a 19-year-old college girl who vanished in 1973 while hitchhiking to her grandmother's farm. Her body was found weeks later near a creek bed off Route 19. Her killer was never caught. Until now. Or so they said. The news broke like wildfire. Cold case solved, arrest made after 5 decades. But the man they jailed didn't seem capable of murder. I'd known Frank Dillard my whole life. He was the quiet mechanic who fixed my father's truck. The man who slipped $5 bills into the church donation jar when he thought no one was looking. Frank was 74, arthritic, and nearly deaf. Yet the sheriff claimed new evidence, found deep in the soil near the old Fitzgerald place, linked him to her death. That's why I came back. I'm not a cop anymore, lost that badge years ago, but when I heard they'd finally closed Kate's case, something in me refused to let it rest. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe curiosity. Or maybe it was that damn humming sound. The first night in my cheap roadside motel, the power flickered 3 times, though the sky was clear and the night still. When the hum began, it vibrated through the mattress springs, low and rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The air grew cold enough to fog my breath. Then it stopped, just as suddenly as it had started. The next morning, I drove to the Fitzgerald property, long abandoned, swallowed by birch and kudzu. The gate creaked open with a noise that felt more like a warning than a welcome. The farmhouse leaned to one side, its windows clouded with decades of dust. I'd seen the crime scene photos, the broken glass, the blood stains on the kitchen floor, but nothing had prepared me for the silence. A heavy, listening kind of silence. That place was cursed before she ever set foot in it, said a voice behind me. It was Clara Benton, Kate's best friend back in 1973. She was in her 70s now, small and sharp-eyed, like a crow with secrets. Folks around here stopped going near this hollow after the night she died, she said. They said something in the ground was sleeping. And when she screamed, it woke up. I laughed, out of habit more than belief. So now the boogeyman's to blame? Clara didn't smile. You hear anything last night? A noise? Like a hum? That froze me. I hadn't told anyone about the sound. I've heard it every September since she died, she said quietly. Always right before the fog rolls in. By the time I got back to town, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Sheriff Lowell. Need you to stop poking around, Jack. We got DNA, clear as day. You weren't here in 73. You don't know what kind of man Dillard really was. He was right. I didn't, but neither did Lowell. The sheriff wasn't even born when Kate was killed. And back then, my father was deputy sheriff. He'd been one of the first on the scene. But when I asked him about it years later, he refused to talk. He just said one thing before changing the subject. That girl didn't die alone. That line haunted me. That night, the hum came again, louder. This time, it wasn't just a sound. The picture frames on the wall trembled. The water glass on the knitstand began to ripple. And then, from somewhere outside the window, a voice, faint but unmistakable, whispered my name. Jack. Every instinct told me to run, but curiosity pinned me in place. I opened the curtain, half expecting to see someone standing there, maybe a prankster from town. But the parking lot was empty. Only the fog pressed against the glass, thick and slow-moving, swirling as if it had a mind of its own. Then the lights went out. I fumbled for my flashlight and swept it across the room. No one. just that cold, humming vibration coming from beneath the floorboards. I could swear the sound was forming words. It wasn't English. It wasn't language at all. It was ancient, layered, like dozens of voices speaking through a single throat. The noise stopped after exactly 47 seconds. I know because I recorded it. When I played it back the next morning, something else became clear. Behind the hum, faint but audible, was the cry of a woman. One word: run. Later that day, I visited the sheriff's office. Lowell looked pale, tired, and uneasy. Before I could ask a single question, he said, "They found something out at the burn pit behind Dillard's place. A necklace. Fitzgerald's, most likely." He dropped it into an evidence bag. There, caked in soil, was a silver locket with KF engraved on the front. But when I pressed my thumb against it, the metal was warm, unnaturally warm, as though it had just been resting against someone's skin. That was the moment I realized this case wasn't about murder anymore. It was about something older. Something that didn't want the truth dug up. And I'd already started digging. I didn't sleep after that. The sound, the voice, the warmth of that locket, it all pushed my mind into places it hadn't gone in years. Something was tying me to this case now, and I couldn't walk away. Not when half the town wanted it buried again. The next morning, I drove to Dillard's garage. The sign still hung above the door. Letters faded to rust. Dillard and Son Auto Repair. The and Son was painted over decades ago. Frank never had kids. I wasn't sure if he'd even remember me. But when he looked up from under the hood of an old Buick, his eyes widened. "You're Robert Lang's boy," he said slowly. "Didn't think I'd see you back in this hollow." His hands trembled when he wiped the oil on his rag. Arthritis or fear, maybe both. I told him I didn't believe he killed Kate. He didn't thank me. Didn't deny it either. He just said, if they found her necklace, then they've started hearing it too. I asked what he meant, but Frank only looked past me, toward the ridge where the oak trees grew thick around the Fitzgerald property. "That's where it hums the loudest," he whispered. "Where the ground opens." Later, as I drove past those same oaks, I noticed something strange. The leaves trembled, though the air was still. At the base of one ancient tree, the soil had sunk in, forming a perfect circle, a shallow depression maybe 3 feet across, the kind of mark you might see if something massive had once pressed upward from below. The strange thing was, inside that circle, nothing grew. No grass, no moss, just gray dust and a faint smell of ozone. That night, Sheriff Lowell called again. "You better quit your little side project, Jack," he said. "You're stirring things that don't need stirring." "I'm just following a sound," I told him. "I don't care what you're following. I lost signal out by the ridge last week. Radio, phone, everything. 2 deputies haven't come back from searching those woods. You want to help?" "Stop." But it was too late for that. My old instincts had kicked in. Obsession doesn't die easy. Neither does curiosity. The following afternoon, I met Clara Benton again. She brought me to her kitchen, where the wallpaper peeled in yellow curls and the air smelled like old lavender. She had boxes stacked on the table, photos, letters, newspaper clippings. Every scrap about Kate's murder since 1973. "Tell me the truth," she said. "You've been hearing it." I nodded. "Then you don't have much time." Clara pulled out an old audio cassette, labeled Police Evidence 73. She set it on the table. "Your daddy gave me this before he passed," she said. "Told me never to play it unless the sound came back. Said it was from the original investigation." My stomach tightened. The Fitzgerald murder had destroyed my father's career. He'd resigned just months after the case collapsed. He never talked about why. Clara slid the tape into a dusty recorder and pressed play. Static filled the room. Then came a man's voice, my father's, calm, professional. "Date, October 5th, 1973. Evidence log, item 12. Audio taken near the Fitzgerald farm, 11:47 p.m. Then there it was, the hum. The same deep vibration I'd heard under my motel floor. But after a few seconds, something else layered over it. Whispers. Hundreds of them, overlapping, repeating the same phrase until it drowned itself. Not alone. Not alone. Not alone. I could barely breathe. Clara crossed herself. That's what I heard the night she died, she whispered. I was on the phone with her when it started. The line cut off mid-sentence. I thought it was static. Now I know it wasn't. I left her house trembling. By dusk, I was sitting in my truck overlooking the valley, watching fog crawl through the hollows like white smoke. Somewhere beyond the trees, that hum returned, faint, pulsing, like the heart of the earth. I grabbed my recorder, climbed out, and followed it. Every few steps the ground seemed to vibrate a little more, until I reached the clearing below the old oaks. The air felt charged, heavy with the metallic taste of rain, though the sky was dry. That same bare circle of soil I'd seen earlier was glowing faintly beneath the twilight. And right at the center lay a piece of broken glass. No, not glass. Something clearer, like thick ice that didn't melt in my hand. When I turned it toward the light, images rippled inside it, shapes moving as if trapped just beneath the surface. Then I saw a face. Kate Fitzgerald's, exactly as she'd looked in every news photo. Wide eyes, long hair, and a mouth frozen in mid-scream. I dropped it, stumbled backward, heart pounding. The hum roared. Birds exploded out of the trees. The circle caved in, the soil collapsing into a black pit that belched out cold air so sharp it burned my skin. For a second, I thought I saw hands, too many of them, reaching upward from the dark. Then it was gone, sealed again as if nothing had moved. I didn't breathe until I was back in my truck. When I finally started the engine, the radio flickered to life on its own. No signal, just static, and then her voice again. Jack, ... They buried me wrong. The static snapped, and the humming was gone. But my reflection in the windshield wasn't mine anymore. For a split second, it was hers. Kate, staring out from my face, blood on her cheek, lips trembling, whispering my name. Then the lights cut out, and everything went black. When I came to, I was still sitting in the driver's seat, drenched in cold sweat. The windshield was fogged from the inside, my keys still in the ignition. I couldn't tell how long I'd been out. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. Outside, the night seemed unnaturally still, as if even the crickets were holding their breath. That's when I saw the shape in my rearview mirror. A woman standing in the middle of the road, her hair whipping in the wind that wasn't there a moment ago. Her eyes glimmered like twin shards of glass. And then she was gone. Back at the motel, the manager said he hadn't seen anyone pass through since sunset. I didn't argue. Instead, I went straight to the bathroom sink and splashed my face with cold water. When I looked up, my reflection flickered. For half a second, I saw her again, Kate staring back. Same blood on her cheek, same torn dress from the 1973 crime photo. When I blinked, it was just me again. By the time morning came, my decision was made. I couldn't rely on the sheriff, and Clara had already given me all she could. There was only one person left who might still have answers. Reverend Hal Bishop. He'd been the town pastor since before I was born. He'd presided over Kate Fitzgerald's funeral, and I remembered him standing behind my father the day he resigned from the force. If anyone knew what really happened in that hollow, it was Bishop. His church sat on a ridge overlooking the valley, its white paint long peeled to gray. Inside, the air smelled of dust and hymns long forgotten. The Reverend himself looked older than the building, his back bent, his eyes cloudy but sharp. "Jack Lang," he rasped when he saw me. You look too much like your father to be good luck. I'm trying to finish what he started, I said. Bishop sighed, motioned toward the pews. Your father didn't start anything. He tried to bury it. What did he bury? The Reverend hesitated so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, quietly, the night Kate Fitzgerald died, your father wasn't alone out there. He and Sheriff Dalton dug something up they thought was human remains. But it wasn't. They brought a piece into evidence. After that, they started hearing it too. Hearing what? The hum. He leaned forward, his voice trembling. That sound wasn't from her killer. It came first, like something calling to her. And after she died, it started calling others. Dalton shot himself 3 days later. Your father tried to destroy the tapes, but the sound came through the walls anyway. He said it wasn't just a voice, it was a door. I didn't know whether to laugh or run. But the memory of that pit under the oaks kept me quiet. Before I left, Bishop pressed something into my hand, a small brass key. Your father left this in the church safe before he quit. Said it opened a locker in the old station basement. You decide if you really want to see what's inside. I drove straight there. The sheriff's office was quiet, half the desks empty. Lowell wasn't around, maybe out mending fences he'd broken with Dillard's arrest. I slipped downstairs, flashlight trembling in my grip. The air in the basement was thick with mildew. Rows of old evidence lockers lined the wall, each tagged by year. I found 1973 near the far end. The key fit perfectly. Inside, 3 items. A reel-to-reel tape labeled Field Recording C, October 7th. A cracked Polaroid photograph, and a sealed envelope with my father's initials. My hands shook as I tore it open. His handwriting was jagged, hurried. If you're reading this, Jack, then the hum found you too. It isn't a sound. It's a pulse, a boundary. When Kate died, something crossed it. We thought it was contained. God help us, we were wrong. Don't touch the ground where they found her. My flashlight dimmed. The beam flickered across the Polaroid. It showed the Fitzgerald farmhouse, midnight, fog curling around the porch. But behind the glass of the second-floor window was a shape, pale, with eyes that reflected the camera flash like an animal's. The reel-to-reel tape spun up easily enough when I found an old player in the corner. At first, just static. Then the hum, louder than ever. Then my father's voice again. October 7th, second site excavation. Ground temperature rising rapidly. Deputy Ray, back up. The sentence cut off in a scream, then the blast of the shotgun. Static filled the room. And under it, faint but building, came another sound. Knocking. From behind me. 3 slow knocks against the metal door. I killed the tape and ran. The basement door slammed behind me, though I never touched it. When I reached my truck, every instinct told me to drive east and never look back. But instead, I found myself steering toward the hollow again. The sky had turned a strange copper tone, the color of a storm that never fully forms. The road there felt longer than before, stretching unnaturally, bending in ways it shouldn't. When I reached the ridge, fog had swallowed everything below. But the hum wasn't faint anymore. It pounded through the ground like a heartbeat. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop digging. They're listening. Then, a call. I almost didn't answer, but the area code was local, and curiosity's a tough disease to cure. A soft female voice came through, static on every word. Jack, you saw me? Kate? There was silence, then a whisper so close it felt like someone pressed their lips to my ear through the line. You're standing where I fell. I looked at the soil ahead of me, that gray, dead ring beneath the oaks. The shape of a pit formed again, just barely, a pulse of movement under the surface. Tell me what happened that night, I said. Instead of a reply, the phone screeched. A blast of sound that sounded half human, half mechanical. I dropped it, and as it hit the ground, the screen lit up with new words. Not text, not a message, but burned into the glass itself, like heat had etched them there. Not buried, waiting. The soil cracked, the hum rising to a roar. Trees bent backward, as if pushed by invisible hands. Something massive moved, just under the surface. Closer, faster. Then a flash of white light. I don't remember driving back. I don't remember sleeping. I only remember waking up at dawn, parked in front of my father's old house, the locket still in my pocket. When I opened it this time, there was a new photograph inside. Not of Kate, but of me, kneeling by that pit under the oaks. And in the corner of the picture, someone else's hand rested on my shoulder. The next morning, I woke to knocking on my door. 3 taps, slow and deliberate. I thought for a second it might be housekeeping, but when I opened it, no one was there. Only an envelope, damp from fog, slid halfway under the frame. Inside was a single photograph. Me again, from behind, walking toward the Fitzgerald farm last night. Whoever took it had been close, too close. On the back, written in thick pencil, were 5 words. Ask your father about the pit? Except my father had been dead for 11 years. I sat down hard on the bed, staring at the picture. The trees in the background looked darker than I remembered, their trunks bending toward the center of the frame, almost as if they'd grown around the spot I'd been standing on. The hum started again then, soft at first, under the motel's floor. Steady, patient, waiting for me to move. I grabbed my gun and the truck keys. If answers existed, they were buried with my father. Literally, his grave sat on a small rise behind St. Luke's, just 30 yards from the church where Reverend Bishop still preached to an almost empty congregation. Mist hung low that morning, heavy with the smell of moss and iron. I kneeled, pressing my hand against the ground, cold as ice. And for the briefest moment, the humming stopped, replaced by a whisper I swear came from beneath the earth. Don't follow him down. I jerked my hand back. My pulse roared in my ears. But curiosity always outweighed fear for me. It's a curse of the breed. Bishop found me there a few minutes later. You shouldn't disturb him, he said. Your father already carries that burden in the next world? What burden? He didn't answer. Instead, he looked past me, toward the ridge line, and said quietly, You still hear it? I nodded. Then you're part of it now. Before I could press him further, a low rumble rolled through the valley. It wasn't thunder. The sky was a flat, lifeless blue. The ground seemed to exhale, and I watched a ripple run through the soil, like something swimming beneath it. Bishop crossed himself. It's waking again, he said. Just like 73. That was enough. I needed to know what it was. I drove to the county archives in Charleston, an hour west, looking for any record of the 1973 investigation besides what I'd already found. The clerk, an older woman with coffee-stained fingers, frowned when I mentioned the case. Without asking questions, she returned with a dusty cardboard box marked Property Records, Braxton County AF. Inside was a thin brown folder labeled Fitzgerald Land Deed, revoked 1974. Inside, a notarized statement from Sheriff Dalton. Area condemned due to seismic instability. Federal oversight requested, pending survey. There was no record of that survey ever being completed. But at the bottom of the page, someone, almost certainly my father, had scrawled in pencil, not seismic, organic. I froze reading that word, organic. Further in the box, paperclip to a topo map, I found another note written in his distinctive block handwriting. Cavity depth unknown, movement observed. Second body confirmed not human. The air in the room grew colder, or maybe it was just my nerves. Whatever they'd dug up in that hollow wasn't a person. But it had blood enough, like one for the sheriff to call the coroner. As the clerk returned, I slipped the papers into my jacket. Some things I knew didn't belong to the public record anymore. It was late afternoon when I reached the hollow again. The hum had grown stronger each time I returned, like it recognized me. As I stepped between the oaks, the trees seemed to lean closer, as though listening. The bare patch of soil looked disturbed, now subtle grooves in the dirt, like fingers dragged across it. I knelt and saw something wedged, half buried, a piece of what looked like bone. Smooth, grayish, curved too perfectly to be from any animal I knew. I brushed off the dirt and realized it wasn't bone at all, but a fragment of hardened shell, almost metallic. The edges shimmered faintly in the light. When I held it to my ear, the hum grew louder. My father's handwriting echoed in memory, organic. Then the ground shifted beneath me. A hollow popping sound, like the air had been sucked out of the earth. And from that center, a thin line of moisture began to spread, forming a perfect circle again. My breathing quickened. The air smelled faintly of ammonia and burned copper. And then, clear as a bell, a voice behind me said, "You shouldn't be here." I turned and saw Sheriff Lowell. His face was pale, drawn thinner than before. "Jack, step away from that circle." Sheriff Lowell's voice cracked like a whip, sharp against the damp air. His flashlight beam cut through the fog, landing directly on the shimmering fragment in my hand. I straightened slowly. "You knew about this." He lowered his gun, but the barrel still pointed vaguely in my direction. "Put it down," he said. "Then we'll talk." I set the fragment on the ground. It pulsed faintly, like it was alive. The sheriff took one cautious step forward, peering at it and swallowing hard. "God help us," he muttered. "There's more of it. What is it?" I asked. Lowell shook his head. "Something your old man tried to erase. The feds came in after the Fitzgerald girl died. Said it was contamination. Sealed the files. Buried the equipment. We were told never to go near this place again. Then why reopen the case now?" He exhaled, visibly trembling despite the gun still in his hand. "Because the hum started up again last month, and then bodies began showing up. Animals first, then one of my deputies. Every one of them with bones like that thing you're holding." It took me a few seconds to find words. "What do you mean, like that thing?" He clicked his flashlight higher, revealing a tarp in the back of his truck. Beneath it lay a shape roughly human. When he pulled the tarp back, the smell of rot hit me so hard my stomach lurched. The corpse had the outline of a man, but the ribs were wrong. Too long, the spine curved inward like a spiral shell, and the surface of its skin appeared to be hardening, fossilizing into the same gray material as the fragment in my hand. "Found him last week," Lowell said quietly. "Wasn't like this when we brought him in. Changed overnight." Then the humming started in the morgue's floor. I could feel the hum rising again now, practically vibrating through my boots. The sheriff's flashlight flickered. Behind us, somewhere deeper in the woods, came the sound of branches snapping, deliberate, rhythmic, as if following a heartbeat. "Let's get out of here," I said. "Now." He nodded, but as he turned, the ground gave way beneath him. One moment he was there, the next he was gone, swallowed by the earth as though the soil had liquefied. The circle widened with a sound like suction. I fell to my knees and reached into the dark. "Lowell." His voice came back, faint but rising, choked with terror. "It's moving." "Jack, it's—" Then a crack, a roar of air and silence. The hum dropped to a single note that seemed to stretch through my bones. I stumbled back, dirt clinging to my hands, heart pounding in my throat. When the noise finally stopped, the depression in the soil sealed itself over, leaving no trace of what had just happened. Only the sheriff's flashlight remained, spinning slowly to a stop on the ground. I picked it up, turned it off, and whispered to the night, "What the hell are you?" The only reply came as wind through the trees, a whispering chorus that almost sounded like words. Not wind, my mind insisted. Voices. I ran. Back in town, no one believed me. Not Clara, not the motel clerk, not even the Reverend when I confronted him the next morning. Lowell's missing, I said. Swallowed by that place. Bishop's expression hardened. That hollow was never meant for people, Jack. It was a vein in the earth, a wound. Something seeps through it when it opens. Your father knew that. Then what the hell did they dig up? You said it wasn't human. The old man hesitated, eyes darting toward the church's stained glass. He told me it was a body without origin, flesh that refused decay. And when they touched it, it changed them. Dalton went mad. Your father burned half the evidence. The rest, he buried under his house. I froze. Buried what? Whatever was left after the government took the bigger pieces. Within an hour, I was digging behind my father's old home on the outskirts of town, following Bishop's directions. The ground was dense clay, mixed with old roots and bottle shards. But about 3 feet down, the spade struck metal, a locker-sized crate. Its hinges had fused with rust. When I pried it open, the smell was old, dry, electric. Inside lay fragments of something that looked skeletal, yet symmetrical. Plates of hardened tissue, fused with metallic veins, like biology and machinery intertwined. Nestled among them was a small reel of film and an envelope labeled Project Marrow. The first page of the file was a typewritten briefing, stamped confidential. U.S. Geological Survey, 1973. It read, Subject, Subterranean Anomaly, Braxton County, W.V. Nature. Unidentified life form, non-terrestrial biomaterial. Site linked to magnetic field deviation and infrasound emissions. Potential cause of localized psychological effects. Non-terrestrial. The words blurred as I read them again. I stared at the skeletal remains. The texture of each piece seemed to pulse with faint heat, responding almost like it recognized my touch. And when I leaned closer, the hum began, faint but rising, this time from inside the crate. The film canister rattled. Something moved beneath the bones, just a twitch, but enough to make me jump back. It stopped. I recorded every angle, every piece, then poured gasoline into the crate and lit it. The flames burned high and blue, but within seconds the contents were gone, not to ash, but to nothing. The air shimmered and the hum vanished, leaving only the faint smell of ozone. That night, my phone rang again. Same unknown number. I answered in silence. Why did you burn it? The voice asked. Female, faint, warped through static. It wasn't done. Kate, I whispered. You think this is about me? The voice laughed, a soft, broken sound. You don't understand. I wasn't the first one it called. Then what are you? Something left wide open, she hissed. And it's still hungry. The call ended. The phone screen glowed faintly, then went dark. From outside, a low tremor rolled through the earth. Not just sound motion, as if the entire valley had taken one slow, deep breath. I stumbled to the window. Across the field, 5 thin columns of light were rising from the woods, converging above the Fitzgerald property like the ribs of some vast, glowing creature beneath the soil. For a brief second, I saw shadows moving inside the light, human shapes bending unnaturally, frozen mid-reach. My reflection in the glass started to ripple again. But this time, it wasn't Kate's face staring back at me. It was my father's. He was mouthing the same words that echoed faintly outside my window. Don't go back to the hollow, son. It's awake. By morning, the valley wasn't quiet anymore. People started hearing it, not just me. The first reports came from the old mines on the East Ridge, where workers said the rock itself was humming. Then the phones in town began picking up the same frequency, a low background pulse that made every voice sound hollow, distant, like speaking through a tunnel. I stood outside the diner nursing a burnt cup of coffee as fog rolled down Main Street, thick and fast. The buildings looked warped through it, as though time itself was stretching between the seconds. A woman crossing the street dropped her groceries and clutched her head, shrieking that something's inside the sound. 2 others fainted. By noon, the emergency radio system failed. The hum had its own broadcast channel now, 7.3 megahertz exactly. When tuned in, it played the same pattern over and over. 3 tones. Pause, 3 tones, then white space filled with something almost human breathing. I drove to the sheriff's office. Lowell's truck was still missing, but 3 deputies were huddled inside, faces gray under fluorescent light. "We tried calling Charleston," one said. "Lines are dead. Generator blew. And people up on Ridgeview? They're digging holes. Big ones. All facing east." "Digging?" I asked. "Like they're being told to," he said. Said the ground was whispering. None of them wanted to go near the Fitzgerald property, but that didn't matter. The hum was spreading outward from it, like ripples in water. By sunset, the power grid failed. The fog took on a phosphorescent glow, faint and pulsing. From the highway hill, I could see the entire town breathing, lights dimming and flaring in rhythm with the hum, as if the place itself had a heartbeat. Clara Benton called just after dark. Her voice shook. "They're coming out, Jack." "Who's coming out?" "The ones buried wrong." Then the line went dead. I reached her house 10 minutes later. The door was wide open, the porch light flickering. Inside, every clock had stopped at 7:13. Her kitchen window was shattered from the inside out, and the air smelled of wet soil and copper. Clara was gone, but the humming there was louder than anywhere else. It rattled the dishes, the picture frames, the pipes in the wall. Something caught my eye on the table. One of her old tapes. It was still recording, reels spinning slowly despite the power being out. I picked it up and pressed play. Silence at first, then static, and finally Clara's voice, faint but composed. It's waking through them. Memories, skin, places. We weren't supposed to remember, but it does. It remembers everything we bury. Another voice overlapped, mine. "Clara, stop. Don't go near the window." The tape screeched, then went blank. I stumbled out into the yard. The ground there was split in narrow, branching cracks, glowing faintly blue beneath the dirt. The vines along the fence moved against the wind, curling inward, reaching for the cracks. When I backed away, I realized every tree on the hill had begun to tilt slightly east, the same direction the diggers were facing. At dawn, sirens wailed faintly through the fog. 2 fire trucks roared down Main, their lights spinning but no one inside. The driver's seats were empty. The engines ran themselves. By mid-morning, all the town dogs had vanished. The river turned gray. People stopped leaving their houses. Some said they could hear voices in their walls. Others swore they saw movement behind their mirrors. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kate's frozen face inside that piece of glass I'd found. But it wasn't pleading anymore. It was smiling. Around midnight, Bishop appeared at my motel door, disheveled and pale. "You have to come to the church," he said. "It's starting from beneath the altar." The sanctuary was half lit with candles. The hum was almost unbearable there, resonating through the pews, shaking the crucifix on the wall until it fell with a clang. Beneath the altar stone, the floor had buckled upward, cracking open to reveal veins of glowing light running like arteries into the earth. I tried to bless it, Bishop stammered, but the ground responded. Suddenly the candles flared, blue-white, and the hymn books on the pews began to whisper, their pages fluttering without wind. Dozens of voices, speaking Kate's name. Then the Reverend screamed. From his sleeves and collar spilled thin threads of dirt, like smoke moving backward. His skin darkened, hardened, spreading up his arms like stone forming in real time. He looked at me with terrified, knowing eyes. "It's remaking us," he gasped, and before I could reach him, the transformation finished. He froze, still upright, a statue of himself fossilized in mid-breath. The hum peaked. My recorder in my pocket activated itself. Over my own panicked breathing, I could hear dozens of new voices joining the resonance. Male, female, young, old, all speaking in exact unison. Not buried, becoming. Outside, the fog thickened into a single wall of light rolling through town. From the hilltop, I watched as every house flickered, walls glowing faintly from within. The outlines of people stood at their windows, unmoving, pale silhouettes with eyes reflecting the same blue light spiraling up from the ground. Somewhere inside that light, something vast was shifting. You could feel it through the soil, a vibration that was more than sound, more than motion. Like the entire valley was turning inside out. Then came a sound I'll never forget. The town siren system blaring on its own, looping a recorded voice through every speaker. Evacuate immediately. Only the message glitched halfway through, melting into the words it couldn't hold back. Inhale. Inhale. I drove until the road ended. The landscape pulsed in the rearview mirror like a breathing lung. On the ridge, I saw distant silhouettes, dozens now, maybe hundreds, moving slowly in synchronized steps toward the Fitzgerald property. I knew that whatever started with Kate's death had finally reached its heartbeat. And the hum wasn't underground anymore. It was in everything. In the wind, in the headlights buzzing, even in my own pulse. When I pressed my hand to my chest, I could feel it, not beating against me, but with me. That was when I realized this wasn't a haunting. It was an awakening. And the whole town had already been claimed. The hum wasn't under the town anymore. It was the town, sinking everything living and dead to a pulse older than memory. And if there was any truth left to find, it waited at the Fitzgerald Hollow Center, where the ground opened like a pupil to light. At first light, the fog peeled back in long ribbons, revealing the procession from Main Street. Neighbors, miners, kids from the high school, all moving in the same slow cadence east, heads tilted as if listening to instructions only they could hear. And between their steps, the dust rose and fell like breath being shared by hundreds of lungs at once. I parked at the ridge and killed the engine, letting the silence between pulses tell me the distance to the center. 3 beats, a pause. 3 beats again, the same pattern. The radios had started coughing up like a secret station no one asked for. The kind of low frequency they say only some people hear. Except now everyone could. Down in the oak ring, the bare circle was no longer bare. It rippled, convex, then concave, as if a diaphragm worked beneath. And the smell that lifted wasn't rot, but ozone and wet stone. The kind of mineral tongue that follows a falling star and clings to clothes. A West Virginia scent that pulls old stories out of men who swore they didn't believe. Kate, I said, useless word that still made heat climb my throat. If you're in there, show me how to stop this. And the answer came not in voice, but in pitch. A shift down the scale that tightened my teeth and made the world's edges bow inward until the circle's rim was all that existed. I stepped in. The ground held like taut skin, springy under my boots, then softened, and a cold climbed my ankles in rings. Not water, not air, something between. And within the cold were textures, threads, plates, sockets that rearranged under each footfall, as though making room for a shape it remembered from another time. At the exact center I knelt and pressed the locket flat against the pulse, and the metal went hot with a private heartbeat, then opened with a sound like a thin shell cracking, revealing not a photo, but a membrane of glistening dark that reflected my face round. Longer in the jaw, eyes set deeper, like the bones were already listening for new instructions. The town's rhythm hit a crest, and the circle dilated, and the hollow became a throat. I fell, not down so much as sideways into a pressure that forgot gravity, sliding along slick planes that flexed and hummed, each surface carrying whispers braided into the tone, and in those whispers were names. So many names, Kate's threaded through others, a chorus of not buried, reshaping into becoming, syllables stretched until they felt like tendons. Light bled from seams that weren't seams until they opened, blue-white and soft as candle halos. And within that glow, the structures arranged in repeated patterns, arches, ribs, spirals too organic to be built, too precise to have grown without a will. And somewhere ahead, a deeper note waited like a held breath before a hymn begins. "Jack," a voice said, not from one place, but from the pressure touching every part of me at once. And for a moment, it was Kate's. But under her rose other tones, older, voices braided into a rope strong enough to pull a town. "Show me," I said, because questions were too small for this. And the floor answered by translating sound into images burned behind my eyes. A night in 1973, when a meteor stitched fire over Braxton County, and men mistook falling light for a monster. When kids ran from a red glow, and grown-ups told themselves owls were to blame. But the ground heard everything, and kept it the way shale keeps ferns for 100 million years. Another image my father and Sheriff Dalton, in mining lamps at the first dig, kneeling over plates of gray tissue veined with metal, each touch deepening the hum until the tape recorders captured a frequency they couldn't hear, a thing they wrote down as organic, because the other word would have made them break. A platform rose, or I was lifted. It didn't matter which, and the air thinned into something sweet and metallic that cleared thought and sharpened fear into a single blade. And beyond the platform stretched a chamber like a bell, carved by resonance, its walls striated with growth rings tall as houses, a record of every time the valley had breathed like this and the years between, quiet as held prayer. At the chamber's apex hung a mass like a seed suspended in sap, faceted yet pulsing, each facet a scene. Clara laughing in 1971, Reverend Bishop young and unbent, Frank Dillard's hands clean of anything but grease. And in another facet, my father burning a crate in a yard that hadn't yet existed, smoke blowing east and the smoke's shadow flowing back west, as if unwilling to leave. "You aren't a ghost," I said to the room, to the seed, to the pulse under the words. "And you aren't a machine," and the hum agreed by shifting into a harmony that lives between categories, a chord that made my ribs ache with a memory that didn't belong to me, louvers vibrating on a bridge, cave wind singing, river ice groaning, all the infrasounds people wrote off until the day they couldn't. "Why, Kate?" I asked, and the walls rippled images of 1973 roads at night headlights. Fog, a girl with her thumb out and a song under her breath, the melody resting on the same three-tone pattern the town was choking on now, and her voice drew toward the hollow like a compass needle to a magnet, because some people are tuned to the gap, and the gap answers back. "And the others?" I said, but the answer showed itself processions from different winters, different droughts, men in Sunday suits, boys in football jackets, women in aprons, eyes glazed in the same listening tilt, all coming when the ring lit and the diaphragm flexed, all paused at the rim, and then all stepping in, not pushed, invited. "What are you waking?" was my next thought, and the seed brightened and split along a line too fine to see. And for a terrible second, I thought it would bloom into teeth. But what opened was less violent and more final. A lens, dark and deep, looking up from the chamber and past me and past the town, aiming east so far it left maps behind. And the lens carried a reflection not of me, but of this valley shaped as an organ inside a larger body. The procession's footsteps began to patter above like rain on drumhead, hundreds of saws reaching the rim in the same beat, and the chamber answered with a rising octave that tightened the membranes until the air itself felt granular. And behind that tone I heard the line my father recorded and tried to burn, the one that survived on every tape and under every floorboard. "Not alone," repeated until the words lost edges and turned into pressure. "A figure stepped out of the light on the platform, Kate, as she had been and not as she had been, edges soft, eyes dark with reflections of the seed. And she took my hand, and the temperature of her skin flickered from living warm to mineral cool, the way the town flickered between one thing and the next. They thought a murderer made me, she said, voice moving through tissue and beam alike, so there was no place it wasn't. But something called me near, and then didn't let me go. And when they buried what was left, they buried me wrong, because this place isn't a grave. It's a mouth that breathes in seasons. If it breathes, it exhales, I said, because bargaining is the mind's last trick. And for an instant, the hum softened like laughter that didn't reach teeth, and the seed's facets rotated to show exits that were not roads' pressure valves, vents in limestone, seams under the river ice, where sound leaves as current and comes back as weather. What wakes now? I asked last time, and the answer wasn't language but arrangement. Plates unlocking, ribs unhooking, a geometry of opening that made the chamber bigger without moving a wall. And somewhere far above the oaks leaned farther east until the roots showed like knuckles. And the town's houses brightened and dinned with the pace of an animal coming out of torpor hungry enough to eat memory. My recorder clicked on in my pocket and caught nothing but the floor's breath, and a low counter-rhythm began under the main tone, halting and human and wrong, and it took a second to realize the wrongness was mine, my heartbeat refusing to match the valleys, my lungs pushing against the pattern instead of inside it, and every mismatch made the chamber vibrate with a new interference, tiny but real. Kate squeezed my hand, and for a blink, her face flickered into my father's the way reflections had been doing for days. Then back, and I understood something cruel, that the hollow borrowed faces from anyone who'd touched its edges long enough, wearing them like instruments wear fingerprints. Let me go, I told her, because the pressure was beginning to set in my joints, like quick-setting stone. And she didn't answer, but the chamber did, lowering the platform toward a darker span, where the membrane thinned until the world on the other side showed a suggestion. Stars without distance, a coastline with no wave, a sky with no weather, and the sound there wasn't hum, but silence pressed so hard it rang. Somewhere above, the first of the townspeople stepped onto the circle, and the diaphragm inhaled, and all the candles in St. Luke's that still burned went out together. And somewhere in a kitchen, a tape reel stopped, and somewhere in a garage, a wrench vibrated off a pegboard, and in the chamber, the seed lens turned its surface toward me like a pupil narrowing to a man-sized question it was ready to answer with itself. I took the locket and laid it on the platform's edge where the membrane met metal and bone, and the heat in it surged until the skin of my palm crisped sweet as paper. And in that pane was a map, fast and bright. 5 columns of light rising from 5 vents like the chairs they built in. Braxton to honor a monster they decided was safe to laugh at. Lines connecting through shale and salt. A network older than roads that had been waiting for a choir. Not a monster, I said, whether to Kate or to myself, or to the thing that breathed. A body, and the hum accepted the word with a drop into a frequency so low it was more tug than tone. And that tug reached for my ribs like a tuning fork finds pitch, and the choice sharpened till there were only 2 edges. Match and be kept, or fight and be broken. I counted 3 beats, and on the pause I filled my lungs against it. A full human breath the chamber hadn't planned for, and the interference rose like a knife on glass, and somewhere far above the fog stuttered, and the procession paused, and the diaphragm hesitated as if a cough had surprised a sleepwalker. Kate's grip tightened hard enough to bruise, and for a moment her pupils flared with the seed's light like backlit mica, then dimmed, and she whispered so close the air of the word moved my ear. If you break it, it breaks you. And all the names braided into her voice nodded on that syllable until it felt like a warning spoken by 1,000 throats that had learned regret. I don't need to break it, I said, and my voice came out steadier than my hands, only to make it miss. And I drew one breath, then another, always on the pause, always wrong by a hair, and each wrongness rang. and the ringing layered into a roughness the chamber couldn't smooth. A grit in perfect gears, a sand in a wind harp, and the lens seed's facets began to jitter, misaligning the scenes until faces slid off their bones and houses unsquared and roads curled like overheated tape. Above us the oaks creaked, wood against wood like old ships, and the first of the townspeople stopped at the rim and lowered her head as if waking from a dream she couldn't fully leave, and the diaphragm exhaled a fraction. Not release, but reconsideration. And in that thin slack, I pulled my hand free and stepped back from the lens, not out, but not in, balanced on a ledge made of everything I still refused to become. The chamber did something, then, that was almost mercy. It softened the frequencies that cut and let the ones that warmed rise. And Kate, or the arrangement wherein Kate tilted her head with a look I had only ever seen in mirrors after long nights. A man measuring cost, a woman measuring loss, a valley measuring both and deciding hunger lasts longer. Next breath decides, said all the voices together finally, and the platform shivered, and the seed pinned me with its dark, and above, the town drew in air like a shoreline pulls the tide before it slams. And I knew the eighth part of this story would not be about finding a culprit or proving a theory, but choosing whether a man can keep his shape when a place asks him to be its lung. The chamber held still the way a crowd holds still before an anthem, waiting for a cue only one voice can give, and the seed's dark lens fixed on me as if an eye had finally found the piece it was missing. Above, 1,000 feet and a lifetime away, the town gathered at the rim like a tide arrested mid-surge. Heads tilted, breath hovering on the same pause that ran through my chest where I refused the valley's rhythm by a sliver. A grit in perfect gears. Next breath decides, the voices said again, braided into a single rope strong enough to pull a life out of its shape. And the rope wore Kate's tone over others older than roads, the way water wears whatever light it finds. I thought of my father in amazement with the tape that wouldn't die, of Bishop fixed in stone mid-prayer, of Clara's empty kitchen with the window blown outward like a lung exhaling memory. And the thought steadied my hands more than courage ever could. If you want me, I told the hollow, you have to take me breathing wrong, and timing is a kind of blade. Used right, it cuts without blood, leaving only a seam the world can't quite close. I filled my lungs on the pause, not the beat, and the interference whined a fraction higher, a hairline crack across glass. The seed's facets jittered. Scenes misregistered porches shifted inches off their steps. Street lamps blinked in odd primes. The oak ring creaked like an old ship finding reef. Kate's fingers tightened around mine, warm, then mineral, then warm again. The way a name sounds right until the second you say it too many times. And she whispered without lips moving, "It won't let you keep that up forever." "Forever is a town's worth of seconds," I said, and took another wrong breath, and another, and the chamber's cord frayed into strands that couldn't quite braid. The diaphragm above hesitated, then hiccuped, the first ungraceful sound I'd heard from it since the valley began to sing. The procession at the rim faltered. A boy in a varsity jacket turned his head as if waking from a nap in class. A woman's hand dropped the spade she'd been carrying like a sleepwalker putting down a candle, and somewhere a siren tried to restart its recorded warning and managed only evac before choking on silence. The chamber adjusted. Frequencies slid under mine to cradle and cancel, an organism solving a problem called one stubborn heart, and for a breath it held me gently the way a deep lake holds a body that hasn't learned to fear depth yet. Then it pushed. Pressure gathered around my ribs like a careful fist. The platform shivered, the seed narrowed, and Kate's face flickered through other faces it had borrowed, Frank's tired eyes, Bishop's set jaw, my father's regret like a watermark, and I understood the offer under the threat. Match and be kept, or keep misfitting until I snapped. I did what my old training taught when a door won't yield changed angle, not force. I stopped trying to break the rhythm, and started writing a new one inside it, tapping my knuckle against the locket on the offbeats. 1, 2, 3, tap. 1, 2, 3, tap, teaching a second pulse to live like a harmony that refuses to resolve. At first, nothing. Then a quiver ran through the walls like laughter that didn't want to be heard, and the seedlings drifted a fraction wider, as if curiosity, not anger, had taken the reins. Living things listen when something interesting happens. Listen, I said to whatever listened back, and I told it a story, the way old men in diners tell weather-plain, unpoetic, true enough to ring. A 19-year-old girl with a hitchhiker's smile. A deputy who burned what he couldn't explain. A town that held its breath so long it forgot it was allowed to exhale. And a son who came home late and still in time to be the wrong note. The chamber answered with images unspooling in the seeds' facets-braided rivers seen from beneath. Coal seams like sheet music. The 1973 firefall skating over the ridge and striking not ground but membrane. Not an invasion. An arrival finding the only shape Earth could offer. A body made of place. You're not here to eat, I said, feeling the truth land the way a tool finds the right bolt. You're here to complete, and completion is just another word for loss if it takes everything. The hum dipped, considering. Completion, too, can negotiate. Take me, I said before the part of me that loves light could argue. Match me, not them. And the sentence tasted like metal and apology. Deals with old things are made of both. Kate's not quite hand trembled. For a heartbeat, it was hers alone, marrow and warmth and grief. And she shook her head almost invisibly, a plea that didn't need words because it already had a grave. This isn't sacrifice, I said to her, and to the lens, and to the crowd above that had forgotten how to choose. It's containment. And I tapped the offbeat again. Not a prayer, a metronome. The seed opened. Not like a mouth, like an iris dark widening into darker, depth inviting shape to fall into scale so large the word down stops meaning anything. And the pressure around my ribs eased not release, adjustment. The way a hand modifies grip to lift weight without breaking what it holds. I stepped toward it, and the locket burned against my chest, hot enough to brand the map it had shown me earlier into skin. 5 columns, 5 vents, 5 chairs in a county that once named its monster after a town and sold postcards to make fear smaller. Close 4, I said to the dark that listens. Leave 1, and the chamber's tone flexed like a wince. Hunger argued, but geometry liked the math. Leave the river vent, I added. Because a body needs an exhaust, or it poisons itself. And the seed's facets showed the waterway, lighting faintly. Current thickening with a hum that left instead of settled. A promise of a pulse that could move without taking shape from bone and brick. Above, the oak ring groaned as roots let go of east and found center again. People at the rim sagged as if released from a word that had held their muscles. Someone sobbed like a new breath hurts. And far off, a single siren found its full syllables and finished. Evacuate. Price, the voices said, not greed. Accounting in the chamber waited with the patience of stone. My breath, I answered, and felt the valley take me at my word. Not life, not death, cadence, a tithe of rhythm paid forward, every day, every hour. A small wrongness taught into the hollow, so it would choose the river when it woke hungry again. The seed narrowed to the size of a coin and slipped inward until it was only a pressure behind my sternum, a counterbeat no one else could hear unless they pressed an ear to me and listened hard enough to learn the trick. The platform rose. The chamber dimmed. The throat of the earth exhaled me the way a body lets go of a held note when the song modulates. And I staggered onto the ring of soil under the oaks at just the moment the procession blinked awake. Faces Frank's shop hand, who changed my oil at 16. Clara's neighbor with the cats. A kid I'd coached for one summer when I still thought I could teach looked at me like I'd come up from underwater. And behind their eyes, the blue was going out, leaving the ordinary browns and greens and grays that make towns human. Wind moved like wind again. The fog unraveled into weather. Somewhere a dog barked the old boring way that makes mornings make sense. Bishop stood where stone had held him and coughed dust, not statue anymore, but man, older by whatever it costs to be almost kept. And he fell to his knees without ceremony and finished the prayer the hum had cut short. I drove to the river with the locket heating and cooling against my skin like a pocket tide and watched a faint shine move under the surface. Eastward, slow and steady, a pulse taking a long way out so it could come back a little kinder next time. The Fitzgerald Hollow stayed quiet for 3 days, then for 3 weeks, then for 3 months, except in September when the air still tightens for a few nights, and phones pick up a soft carrier wave at 7.3 megahertz. 3 tones, pause 3 tones, and if you don't know what you're listening to, you call it interference, and change the station. Frank Dillard died in his sleep before the charges could be dropped. The town gave him the mechanic's funeral you give a man who fixed more than he broke, and no one said the word murder out loud at the graveside. They put a new plaque near the oak ring, not for a monster, but for the people who came when called and came back when released, and the words are plain, not buried, remembered. Sometimes at night, the counterbeat under my ribs syncs by accident with the clock on my wall, and the lamp buzz, and my own foot tapping, and the house breathes with me for a bar or two before I reset the measure and teach the wrong right again. Once, in November, I woke to the locket open on my chest, without my hands on it, and found a new photo inside. The river at dawn, thin ice forming, 5 faint columns of steam in the distance, like chairs made of light, and in the corner a reflection of a face that could be Kate's or mine, depending on how you tilt it. If you go there now and stand in the oak ring and listen not for the old hum, but for the space where it isn't, you'll hear the town's small sounds louder. A screen door, a truck downshifting, a train 2 counties over dragging its iron tail past midnight. And under all that, if you're the kind that catches low notes, you'll feel a pulse heading east under the river, choosing water over bone, because a man with a stubborn heart made a deal that left the rest of you to your mornings, your coffee, your dogs barking in the ordinary way. When it wakes again, and it will, I'll be here to keep time wrong until it learns the path out. That's the work, quiet and unheroic, the kind nobody claps for, the kind the old will tell you is just breathing. If you were expecting a killer caught and cuffed, a bow tied neat around 5 decades of fear, you haven't been listening to the right note, because some endings don't resolve. They resonate, and sometimes the best a man can do for a place he loves is to be the grit that keeps its music from turning into hunger.